What I do see is that companies can delay hiring because as they're getting more out of their existing team, there's not as much pressure to bring more people on downstream to continue the growth that they're accelerating.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Revenue Problem Solvers podcast, where we try to crack the code on growing your business by tackling the challenges that keep revenue leaders up at night. I'm Carl Ortmans, and on today's episode, we're going to dive into a topic that, well, maybe it's topical in the world today, AI. Now, today's podcast is sponsored by the great people at Virtual Causeway. Traditional demand gen is breaking for a lot of teams that we talk to on the Revenue Problem Solvers podcast. Virtual Causeway actually helps you fix that by shifting from demand generation to demand positioning. Instead of chasing form fills, they'll actually engineer where and how your brand appears when buyers research through AI tools and peer networks. What's the result? Well, it's fewer cold motions, more high intent conversations, and revenue teams actually spending time with people who want to buy. You can check them out at virtualcauseway.com, and don't forget to mention the show for a special rate. Now, my guest today is Justin Shriber. So Justin's career tells, I'll say, a story of modern revenue technology growth. He started in the early days of enterprise software as a director of product management at Siebel Systems, back when CRM was still a bit of a revolutionary idea. Now, Oracle acquired Siebel, and he became a senior director of product marketing, and then the regional manager of strategic accounts, and then the RVP of cloud CRM. Now, that led to VP roles at the VP of product marketing at Aptio and VP of products and marketing at C9. Now, C9, this was the second acquisition because Inside Sales acquired them. There's lots of stories. Justin, your background's amazing. He then joined LinkedIn as the head of marketing for sales solutions, and then a VP of marketing for sales and marketing solutions. He's a contributor of Forbes. He's had CMO roles at People.ai and Entra, which paved the way for his current role as co-founder and CEO of Territ. Now, Justin has had a front row seat to how revenue systems have evolved and has helped drive revenue growth inside some of the most influential technology organizations. From leading teams through large-scale transformation, scaling enterprise motions, he's experienced the friction that shows up when systems don't talk to each other and forecasts don't really match reality. All that has ultimately led him to co-found Territ.ai. It's a company focused on rethinking how revenue teams operate in an AI-native world. Not just layering AI on top of old processes, but redesigning workflows so data, execution, and decision-making are connected from the ground up. I just said a whole lot, Justin, but welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining us.
Carl, it's great to be on the show.
So to kick us off, I know, by the way, hopefully I didn't tell too much about your background, but I was kind of fascinated how it all came together.
Oh, yeah, I was interested in that. You did a great job there. I forgot about all of that stuff.
Well, it's experience and it's a journey. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So if we kick us off, what are some of the selling motions, industries, verticals you work with today? Like what size companies are you working with?
So we are a direct sales model. Our ICP tends to be companies that started about 100 million and up. We've got very large customers like MongoDB, and then we'll go down into smaller customers. But given the nature of the work that we do, typically companies that benefit the most from Territ have larger sales organizations and more complex B2B selling motion. Could be in high tech, it could be in manufacturing, medical device. Anywhere where you've got a sales cycle that's roughly 6 months, multiple stakeholders, a lot of stages associated.
Okay, so can I ask the question, because you kind of teased it to me, and I got to ask the question now. Territ, what's the story behind the name?
Yeah, so Territ actually is the name of the ring on the side of a horse's bridle, and the rein passes through this ring, and so it's how the rider is able to guide the horse to the destination. So we thought there was some great symbolism there in terms of how we help CROs to guide their organization to growth. On top of that, it's a palindrome. I was dyslexic as a kid, so I love anything you can spell forwards and backwards and you get to the same result.
Oh, I see it now. It's like race car, but it's okay.
There you go.
That's very cool. So how we got to today's topic, and thank you for sharing, by the way. How we got today's topic is I asked Justin, just like I ask everybody, what's a successful revenue initiative you've ever led or an existing challenge you've either solved or are solving? And he came back with one where it's obviously the topic of AI, but more specifically, deploying AI to accelerate growth. And how do you track the true ROI or the impact of it? So immediately was all excited about this one. And so maybe if we start the conversation here, if a CRO calls you and says, "Hey, Justin, we just rolled out AI across our entire revenue org. What metrics should I look at first to determine if it's actually working?" What would you tell them?
So, Carl, I'd say that there are actually three different sets of metrics, and each set of metric builds on the previous set. One of the mistakes people make is they immediately try to jump to that big ring and they bypass a lot of the interim steps. And that's probably the biggest reason that companies fail. So, the three stages are: number one, get your data house in order. And there's some metrics we can walk through related to the quality of the data you're capturing. Number two, start to track metrics related to the productivity of the sales organization. And then once you've got that, you're ready to move on to the third bucket, which is looking at the true economics of your business. How much revenue are you generating per dollar of expense that you're putting into the system? And if you've done it right, you're going to see top line accelerate while you're keeping expenses relatively flat.
Okay, there's a lot there. So the first thing I'll ask you maybe in a couple of different ways, but just to try to understand it. So the first thing you talked about is having the data in order. Is this like, hey, you got to have your data pool or whatever you want, your data lake, you got to make sure that that's rock solid before you deploy AI? Or are you suggesting, hey, if you deploy AI, just recognize that if this data structure is not in place, it's not going to do anything for you?
Well, I think the fundamental reality is that AI is only as good as the context that you feed it. And the reason I mentioned previously that so many of these AI projects fail is because you're trying to build AI on top of a data set that is either flawed, has inaccurate data, inconsistent data, a lot of duplicate data. No company that I have yet met has perfect data. So the objective is not perfection. However, the objective is to build a foundation that over time gets better and better. And so there's a couple of steps involved in that. First of all, just clean up the data that you've already captured. And there's data in your CRM system. It's scattered through your data warehouses. You're collecting it through email and call transcripts. There are some great solutions out there today that will allow you to do simple things like deduplicate your records, enhance your records in CRM with information that you may not currently have, firmographic, demographic information, for example. Once you've got clean data, this is the piece of advice I give to everyone. Don't let the humans touch it. The reason your data is messed up in the first place is because the humans got to touch it. So you do all this investment, you get the data clean, and then the humans come back and they blow it up again. In all seriousness, though, that's actually a possibility today. We have automated systems that can feed primary data from calls, from emails, directly into your CRM and your data warehouse so that you no longer have to rely on the humans to be able to capture and accurately reflect what's going on in the business. And I think that's really one of the unlocks.
That's really it's interesting you say that, because as soon as you said don't let the humans touch it, I immediately think of, how do you type it, like use IBM? Oh, I put IBM. Some might put International Business Machine. Like there's a different, or maybe there's a I.B.M.
Yeah.
How do you look at it that way? But as you maybe talk a little bit about this, is it specific to the revenue teams or is it across all of it? And the reason I'll give you a bit of context of where my head's at and why I'm asking the question is, in terms of revenue teams, there's so much data. There's marketing, there's customer success, there's sales, there's all of this data that you have. Who's the one that spearheads that to say, I'm going to clean this all up? Or are you leveraging technology? Which one, or is it a connection point between a CRO, as an example, using technology, or is it an IT person? Like, who's looking at that, and are they leveraging it by them? Are they doing it by themselves, or do you suggest technology to do it for them?
Well, RevOps is the team that ultimately has to look after the quality of the go-to-market data. And I say RevOps, maybe 10 years ago, you would have had a marketing ops team and a sales ops team. Very quickly, those teams are combining and companies are thinking more holistically about the end-to-end revenue flow. So it's the RevOps team that thinks about the revenue data, but the tool that they're going to use is an AI-based tool that allows them to, first of all, get a bead on how clean their data currently is. And then that same tool can address the issues that are identified. Again, whether they're duplicates or insufficient data, all of that can be addressed now through AI in a fraction of the time that it used to take a team of humans to do it.
All right, so now I look at it and I hear you. I hear what you're saying. Do I now that it gets deployed, like, where do I even start? Do I start at the foundation of just the accounts? Where, because I think that's one of the things that I can see the overwhelming come together. You have however many pieces of technology. If you're feeding into like a data lake, like a Snowflake or something, like, Justin, where do I even begin to try to solve this?
Yeah. Well, there's a really exciting new movement afoot that's able to essentially create one composite view of your revenue. Territ, one of the primary things that we deliver is what we call a revenue graph. This revenue graph is able to essentially assemble all of the different revenue data points that have been collected throughout your enterprise into one cohesive picture of what's happening with revenue. For example, if I'm pursuing 5 deals at IBM, the revenue graph will be able to show me IBM, the surrounding deals, and for each of the deals, all of the information that's captured in CRM, the billing information in a data warehouse, the emails, the call transcripts. And just to put this in perspective, this is not a trivial process. We're working with a mid-sized customer right now. Their revenue graph is 12 terabytes of data. To put that in context, the U.S., I know you're in Canada, so the U.S. Congressional Library of Congress. I don't know for Canada what yours is, probably roughly the same, but ours is about 12 terabytes of data if you were to look at all the information contained in the books in that library. So this is a massive undertaking to bring this together, but to do it in a way that still conforms to the security requirements that a company has. But once you've built that revenue graph, you now essentially have a complete picture of your revenue. And now you can start to answer questions through the AI that you point at it and unlock information that you weren't capable of unlocking before.
That makes me think that all the systems are talking to each other. And I think, is that one of the challenges even to start? Because that is a lot of data, and where does it come from, and et cetera, from each company. So sifting through that information has got to be extensive. I mean, the first thing I think of candidly is like, oh, leads and contacts, you can't actually connect inside of Salesforce inside of one. Like, that's a challenge. But this is taking it like that's a simplistic challenge versus what you're saying. So do you have to prepare and ensure that all your systems are actually talking to each other to even try to get anything close to what you're talking about?
So, first of all, yes, it's a complicated problem, and I'll just add one more layer of nuance to this. Let's say that I have a fundamental question like, why are my win rates in Europe dropping? In order to answer that question, I have to know, well, what deals was I competing against in Europe? And then I've got to pull all the call transcripts because there's some really rich information there. And the problem historically has been that your call transcripts don't necessarily mesh with your CRM data. So in days past, you had to first of all query CRM and get the list of all the deals. And then you had to go over to your call recording solution and literally one by one query each of those call transcripts that corresponded to the deals and try to extract insights and then put it all together. So today we've got one integrated revenue graph, as I mentioned, and there's two approaches here. There's the build versus the buy. And honestly, some companies have been very successful building their own revenue graph. I was just talking to a customer yesterday, Now, to be fair, this was a $5 billion in annual revenue company. So it was massive. They had a dedicated AI team that sat underneath their RevOps team. And essentially what they did is they built a giant data warehouse, all of the ETLs to move data in and out of systems, tremendous amount of work in terms of joining the data together in a cohesive way. But they had the expertise in the team to do it. Now, even with that, it took them about 6 months to be able to build this revenue graph on their own. And one of the things they shared is it's a relatively brittle graph. Anytime we introduce a new data source, we've got to figure out how to bring that in, the ETLs, we've got to join that to all the other data. So it is absolutely an ongoing project to maintain it. That's the build scenario. Companies that have the resources, that's the path they tend to go down. The buy scenario is work with a company like Territ. We can literally, because it's what we do, stand up a revenue graph in 48 hours. We've got a specialized architecture and a series of utilities that are able to construct that. And then on an ongoing basis, it's a very flexible graph that is able to adapt as you introduce new use cases and new underlying data. But whether you're in the build camp or the buy camp, this is one of the fundamental differences between AI and some of the historical technologies. If you don't have that graph, then the AI and what it produces on top of it just isn't going to give you value.
Okay. ETL. You said ETL a couple of times. What is it? What are you referring? What does that stand for?
Extract, transform, and load. This is a term from big data. If you've got one system and they've got data that's in a certain format and you've got to move it to another system, first of all, you've got to extract that data. You then have to transform that data into a format that the receiving system understands, and then you need to load it into the new system. And as you can imagine, because you've got a myriad of different systems delivering and receiving, those ETLs can be fairly complex to build and maintain over time.
Sure, it sounds super easy. I'm a global company. I speak 10 different languages. How do you handle that?
Yeah. That's a problem that I won't go into detail in depth, but suffice it to say there are companies out there and they specialize in building ETLs. I come from Oracle, so obviously Oracle has nailed this. The technological problem is not hard anymore. However, it requires resources to maintain and a certain level of expertise in order to apply. And so again, if you've got that in-house, awesome. But if that's not where you have resources or those resources are occupied doing other things, absolutely, you're in the buy category. And companies like Territ, we've solved the problem and can do it at a fraction of the cost and time that most companies would be required to do themselves.
Okay. Big companies can do a lot of things. Like you said, there's some of these teams that can do in 6 months, et cetera. And there's something I'll come back to it because we're talking about deploying AI to accelerate growth and tracking true IR and impact. And from different stage companies, they can probably pull at different areas, but also from a smaller perspective. So going back to the beginning, you said, make sure you have your data in order. So for sake of conversation, great, Justin, we got our data in order.
You have a data graph now. What's
perfect?
Next? Yep.
Now I've got to go, what am I even tracking to make sure that I'm showing productivity for success?
Yeah. So the ultimate metric is how much revenue is each member of the go-to-market team producing. That's the gold standard. And this is a number that's fairly easy to calculate. And over time, the savvy companies are able to track that number and demonstrate that quarter over quarter, they're bumping that by 10, 15%. That's where the real needle mover is. See, historically, the conventional wisdom is if I want to grow by 25%, then I've got to grow my expense base by 25%. I want 25% more sales. I got to go hire 25% more sellers. And that means I got to go hire more RevOps people and more enablement people. It's a linear equation that links top line growth to the underlying expenses. AI breaks that model. It actually allows you to continue to push the productivity or the revenue per rep without having to increase your expenses. And that's one of the things that's so exciting about this new era of selling.
David Boyce, I don't know if you know David Boyce.
Yeah,
oh, do you? So Dave was on the podcast Actually, I think we launched the very first week of the year. One of the things we talked about in the conversation was exactly this topic of valuation in relation to revenue per head count and the shift going there. But as you kind of mentioned, AI is not free and there's a variable cost, etc. So preparing for this, and you have to make an investment somehow. How are companies talking to you about, hey, Justin, I want to grow, but I need to increase? And you say, hey, look, great. You don't have to add 3 fully loaded headcounts. You can actually take the value. I don't know. I'm just making something up. You can take the value of one, implement it to AI. And by the way, you're gonna 3x each of your revenue headcount. How do you prepare, or even how do you advise them to think about structuring structure to improve their revenue per headcount, but knowing they have to spend more money?
Yeah. So the I always like to share an ROI model, and this is for companies that are really nailing it, that helps them to think about the ROI associated with AI. If you think about a company that's got 100 sellers, call it $1.2 million quota per seller, and they want to grow by 25%. As I mentioned before, conventional wisdom would say you got to go hire 25% more sellers. Well, at 225K a head, which is kind of the going rate for a B2B seller these days, you hire 25 more reps, that's going to cost you $5.6 million a year. So material impact in terms of your cost basis. On top of that, it's likely that you're going to bring in some level of consultancy to help you figure out how to streamline the sales process. You're growing, you want to be more efficient. Call that $500,000 to $1 million. And then you've got your incremental rev ops and your enablement people on top of that. Call that another 350K. So to get to that 25% growth at the top line, you're looking at a bill of about $6.5 to $7 million. So these are not trivial numbers. Imagine though, if you can basically say, I'm going to get 25% more out of my existing headcount. That completely changes the equation. The $5.6 million goes away because you're getting that out of your existing sales team. You don't have to hire incremental rev ops and enablement people because, again, you're expanding their capacity. And suddenly that 6.5 that you're spending is dropping straight to the bottom line. So there are real dollars and cents associated with these technologies. The key, though, Carl, is being able to unlock that productivity and demonstrate that you're able to do more with the same cost basis that you were running historically.
And the other question that I actually wrote down is the time to value. When you bring a headcount on, you can pretty well, if you got as you get your stuff together, you can pretty well fundamentally say that person pays for themselves at this date. We see value in this date. How do you advise these companies to look at the time to value, knowing that there is a journey? This isn't a push the AI button and it works. It's a journey.
Well, in terms of the time to value hiring a new head, typically to hire a great seller, it's going to take about a quarter of recruiting. You bring that person on board, and then they're going to ramp, depending on the complexity of the product, between 2 and 3 quarters. I was just talking to a company yesterday, again, a large company, and they had a 4-quarter ramp period. So it is not a panacea to just say we're going to go out and hire new people. The amount of time that it would take to ramp an AI solution is roughly equivalent. I think after a 6-month period, if you're doing it correctly, you are going to see material impact to the productivity of your sales team. The difference, though, is rather than ramping one rep over a 6-month period, you're actually generating more productivity out of your entire sales team. And so there's a compounding effect that you get because of the magnitude of the people that are impacted by the change that you're making.
And speaking of change, there's a change management that has to come in play too. So who owns the change management that you're talking about for all of this?
One of the things that I love the most about these new technologies is the way that it immediately plugs itself into the natural process that a seller has. And I'll give you one case study from a customer that we're working with. They had that very question I opened up with. Why are my European win rates dropping? We built the revenue graph for them in a period of about 48 hours. It was a big revenue graph. From there, we were able to start to talk to the data. We literally were using Claude on the front end, and we said, look at all the European deals and tell us why win rates are dropping. And in about an hour, we had a complete diagnostic on the reasons that they were losing in Europe. We translated that into a playbook where we looked at the closers and the behavior they were exhibiting. And then this was the best part. We were able to actually serve up call scripts so that when reps got on calls, we were able to take that best practice playbook, combine it with where the rep was at the moment in the deal, and we knew who they were talking to and their proclivities. So we incorporated that into the call script. Suddenly they've got a talking script that embodies the best practices that they can apply. And then as soon as they hang up the call, they get a report that says, here's your grade, here's what you did well, and here's what you didn't do well. That's revolutionary because historically the process was send them to training for a couple of days. They forget everything that they learned in training when they go to the bar that night and hope for the best. Now it's as you walk into the call, you've got your call script, and as you come out, you get some coaching. It's going to stick a lot better that way. So the change management is a lot lower lift now, but the impact that you get is a lot higher.
This is touching on a topic and something I've been asking quite a few people, and maybe you have an opinion on it. I think it's topical. When you start to, we've seen the evolution, we've seen the impact of AI and how we're doing things on a day-to-day basis, and it's becoming a secondary language. We didn't get a playbook for it. It dropped in all of our laps all at the same time, and we're all figuring it out as we go. Some are better than others. Now we're getting into these really complex things that you're talking about, the amount of storage and data that is being transferred and transformed to spit out an information. What's that next evolution for AI? And I'll give you a bit of context. We've seen the rise of a CRO. Not very long ago, we didn't have the CRO. That role didn't exist. Are companies that you're working with starting to have call it a CAI, a chief AI officer? And if so, or maybe not, or maybe you have an opinion of it, who's the right type of skill set to be that AI leader inside of a company? Is it a CRO or is it RevOps? Is it an IT person? Is it a security person? Is it like, what's the skill set to do everything you're saying right now? Because I'm thinking of it as like, as a revenue leader, I like the outputs, but I know that's a lot of inputs from me. And if I'm going to do it, I could already see like a chief security officer or a chief information officer being like, hold on, Justin, you want to touch my entire data lake and you want me to potentially expose things. How do I know it's like, I can already anticipate some of the conversations. So do you have an insight or an opinion on if that AI officer exists, and specifically what we're talking about, what's the skill set that they're going to need to be able to do what you're talking about?
Well, I think there is a combination of roles. Companies need infrastructure in order to successfully deploy AI. And again, whether you're in the build category or the buy category, somebody needs to solve that problem. So in our case, we're providing our customers with a revenue graph, and we interface with someone on the IT side that will oversee that revenue graph. Then you need to basically adapt that to specific use cases. A CRO is going to want to know, hey, I'm walking into a board meeting and I need an update on my forecast. And so you'll have someone in RevOps that can essentially translate that question into the prompts that are used to extract the proper information. So I think that there will be in each of the different organizations an AI expert, if you will, that will be able to translate business questions and business problems into the prompts that ultimately extract the answers from AI. It sounds complicated, and there is some art to prompting these models, but at the end of the day, I think this is kind of your new analyst and the skill set that they'll exhibit. Historically, an analyst was a whiz on Excel or Google Sheets. Moving forward, they'll be a whiz on knowing how to ask these LLMs the right kind of questions to get the right kind of answers.
As you're explaining it, that's immediately who I went to, is like, who's the chief data person that's looking at it? Because they're going to have, and now maybe it's somebody who has like, a McKinsey background, or they spent a lot of time in those McKinsey or Bain or Deloitte or whatever, and that maybe is a skill set. There's definitely a technical aspect that comes to play. And I'm trying to think of who could I even suggest would be a great role for that has deep technical knowledge, also understands the risks, but also the revenue side. Like I'm going to be curious to see how this transpires as we go and who that role is, or does it roll to the CEO, or is it a separate team? Anyways, I'm sort of
you mentioned McKinsey, and actually I think that's a relevant metaphor. I spent a little bit of time there, and so understand how those consulting engagements run. And my job was to basically sit down with an executive, understand what they needed, and then go find all the data to answer those questions. I actually think that McKinsey, it'll be interesting to see what happens with that firm, because now you've got these powerful LLMs that are able to do all of the reasoning and essentially bring the brain power of a McKinsey to bear. The LLMs are exposed to a revenue graph that essentially knows everything about your revenue. And so what we like to tell our customers is that when you run with Territ, you're essentially getting McKinsey in minutes, not months. And the key there is to be working with someone in your organization that is smart enough to understand the business problems and then can work with the LLM to get the right answers.
Okay, so did that naturally lead us into the third one? Because we talked about the metrics, we talked about the economics, and the last one you said was AI in context. And I think there's actually was a course that I ran, and I really like the analogy. And I don't know if you use this or maybe it's connected, but they said, it's the AI sandwich. Human tells an AI what to do, and that the human validates whether it's correct or not, or gives it insight, because there's guardrails, right? You have to tell AI what to do. So what the last one you said is the third one is you have to give, do you have your data in order, the metrics and productivity, and now we're talking about the economics of the business. And it seems like we naturally shifted there, even just in the conversation with that McKinsey in minutes, not months. I don't know if you've taglined that, but well done.
So the McKinsey in minutes, not months is, I think, one of the unlocks here. And our customers are telling us, man, the team that we have is suddenly so much more insightful. They're able to jump to the heart of these questions that we could never answer before. For example, we're competing against competitor X. We knew that was a problem. We had some opinions about why competitor X was winning. Now, RevOps is coming back and they've got a detailed breakdown of the 6 failure points, and they've got a playbook against this competitor, and they've been able to implement that. They know exactly when reps are going into a call what they can do. So the other powerful dimension to this, McKinsey, you hire them and you pay them $1 million and they're there for 6 months harassing your people. And I can say that because I was one of the harassers for a long time. And then after all of that, what do you get? You get a PowerPoint presentation. And then McKinsey walks out one door and the poor operator is looking at this deck saying, now I got to actually do something with this thing. And so the other powerful thing here is that you're not only getting strategy, you're able to operationalize that strategy. We're embedding it in our systems. So once we know, for example, how to beat competitor X, we can put it into the systems, the workflows, the automations, and activating it in the moments that matter. When you walk into a call, you know exactly what you need to accomplish and how in that call. And it's that link between the strategy, the operation, and the execution, which is very unique relative to historically what consultancies have been able to serve up.
Yeah, that's the thing of like what, as you mentioned, is you get this massive deck, and great. When you do all of this right now, my question that's outstanding is, who's the ownership of the outputs? You have all this information, it spits it out. Like, now who owns it and the game plan? Because could you become lost in the analysis by paralysis situation, or is that a real new problem with all the outputs of AI? Or maybe it's who does own the outputs of this, to make sure that, look, I gave you all the data, I gave you the information, go do it. Like, who owns it?
Yeah. Well, this actually takes us full circle back to your original question, which is metrics. And as I said, the one metric that is more important than any other is your sales productivity. If you can use that as your guiding light, and continually ask the question, what am I doing to drive sales productivity? What does this analysis tell me? And how do I actually translate that into sales productivity? You're not going to go wrong. So, for example, I could get mired in a deep analysis of a particular segment, but if there's no output that's actually going to change behavior, I know that I'm on the wrong track. So with these new models, these AI models, you can always at the end ask the question, interesting insight, but what can I do now to actually change the behavior of the person that's involved in this segment? And you can get a series of outputs, whether it's a playbook or a call script or an email cadence that will ultimately take the intelligence, the strategy, and package it up in a way that it's going to have a material impact on the people that are executing on the front line.
And for the sales productivity, do you have to start with, look, for example, the ROI? Because I know we've talked, the topic is ROI or impact of AI to accelerate the growth. And so do you look at it initially and say, look, the impact is going to be your reps are going to be able to have ability to work 3 more opportunities, or they're going to be able to complete X number more activity? Like, what is that? What's the first measure of sales productivity? Because I can't foresee you saying drop it in and your revenues are going to grow right away. There has to be an evolution to that
Yeah.
sales productivity. So where do you start before you get to the true measure of revenue as the ROI?
Yeah. So you're in the second bucket, which is that productivity bucket. And what I always advise is there are a couple of key leading indicators that help you to know that you're making progress. Number one, just look at the number of accounts in a rep's book that they've touched and with whom they're actively engaged. You'll find that as a baseline, typically reps will engage with about 60% of their accounts. And then there's another 40% that go untouched. If AI is doing its job, you're suddenly going to see that 60% jump to 85, 90%. That gives you confidence that you've got much broader coverage. Second thing you want to look at, what are the length of sales cycles? You should see sales cycles compress because reps are now functioning more efficiently. They're actually getting to the heart of what it takes to sell faster. And as a result of that, they're accelerating the sales process. And then number 3, what are the close rates? If you can see that your reps are touching more accounts, they're closing deals faster, and the close rates are going up, you then have the confidence to say, all right, my reps books right now comprise 80 accounts. I'm going to give them 100 accounts because I know that they're touching accounts, they're getting deals done faster, which means they have more capacity, and their win rates are going up. So now you go from 80 to 100 accounts, and if they can maintain the same close rates on 20% more accounts, that's where suddenly you see the bounce in terms of how much you're paying versus the revenue that you're getting out of those reps.
Okay, makes sense. And so do you measure this based on the length of cycle? So if somebody says, "Hey, what's my time?" Is it 1 sales cycle? Is it 2 sales cycles? Is it 1 quarter? Like, how do you measure it?
Yeah, so we would look across 2 quarters typically is where it takes what's required to manifest. We'd baseline at the beginning, what's your average sales cycle, whether it's 70, 85 days, what's your average close rate, and over a 6-month period, we would track those numbers. And then also how many accounts are the reps touching. By the end of that 2 quarters, hopefully you've seen your sales cycle reduced from 85 days down to 65 days or whatever the number might be. That's a measure of efficiency. You've also seen your close rates start to grow over that same time period. All of those are indicators telling you that your reps have more capacity now than they did before because of the way that they're performing. And if they have more capacity, give them more accounts.
Okay, new question. Totally different talk track. I'm going to be building a business.
Yeah.
I'm doing all my planning. Now you talked about capacity.
Yep.
How do you layer all of this? How does capacity planning change with AI from a team structure perspective?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I get the most excited about is the way that the economics completely are transformed with AI. And this actually gets to that third bucket that we talked about is transforming the assumptions that you're making around the margins that you're able to drive. Companies typically have assumptions around capacity. I know that if I need to hit whatever, $10 million a quarter, if I'm a smaller company, and I've got reps that are able to produce 300,000 per quarter, it's simply a math problem to figure out how many reps I need. And I've actually been in boardrooms where we'll say, this is our projection for the quarter. And the next question is always, let me see your hiring plan and make sure that you have enough rep capacity to actually hit that number. Well, that's all based on a fundamental assumption of how much revenue a rep can produce per quarter. So with AI, essentially what we're saying is that assumption changes and the capacity of each rep is increasing, and therefore the number of reps that you have to hire is declining. So I don't typically see companies firing reps. What I do see is that companies can delay hiring because as they're getting more out of their existing team, there's not as much pressure to bring more people on downstream to continue the growth that they're accelerating.
It is an interesting time. Dan Wardle, a friend of mine who's VP of sales at Spellbook AI. He talked a lot about this. They're an AI company as well, but they're trying to grow efficiently, not the old model of like, we need to triple. Well, there's your capacity plan, there's your headcount plan, go do it. But it's the wrong way of it is the wrong way of approaching it, because you have a time to productivity, and I could hire you today, but my year started in January, but if you're not ramped until I only have a certain period of productivity that I can get from you. Now there's going to be the next question that I think that maybe it plays out in a little while is, okay, we had all these assumptions, we leveraged all this technology, did it work or not? And if it didn't work, then who's the one to own it? Is that AI dropped in? Is it still back on the sales leader, or is it on the technology? Like, there's a lot of bets being placed.
Yeah. Well, I think that companies can take a measured approach to AI investment. We're not talking about a bet the farm investment where out of the gate you're putting tens of $millions of dollars into this. The nice thing about AI is that if you start small, achieve wins, you can build on those wins. So I presented a model where just start by cleaning up your CRM data, and you can measure that. You can see how high is the quality, how many fields are updated. That's a win if you can do that. And any CRO that's got better CRM data is going to be better off. Number two, start to focus on the productivity of your sales team. Again, you're not betting the farm. You're investing in some well thought out tech. And when you start to see sales cycles compress, win rates go up, again, you know that you've done a great job. And that's when you can really lean in and make the big investments where you can do these broad global transformations. But that global transformation is a couple steps down the road. And I think actually that's why a lot of companies have become disgruntled. They've tried to go swing for the fences out of the gate rather than learning, proving, generating credibility on some smaller bets and then building from there.
I think that I like how you said that, because what are you starting with? Prove it, then scale. Don't try to scale before proving it. And there's all the steps to go. I'm looking at the time. I told you we get you out of here, and I mean, this has been a fun conversation. It's gone 43 minutes and we're already flying. So as we go into the wrap up, Justin, I like to ask everybody likes new and everybody likes different. When you do both at the same time, it can either cause friction or uncertainty. So somebody who wants to do exactly what we've been talking about, here's how you accelerate growth with AI, and here's how you track your ROI for the impact. What are the 2 or 3 actionable things that you say, hey, go do them? And you kind of just said it, but I'll just say it back to you. Clean up your CRM, look at the productivity for your sales reps, and then number 3, pick something before you scale. I don't know if I capture them or if you would reframe it in some other way.
Yeah, and I'll put a finer point on that. Obviously, I'm biased because I'm in this space, but we try to make it as easy and frictionless for customers as possible. So my first point is, work with us to build a revenue graph. We can build it in 48 hours. And then your first use case is going to be use the revenue graph to figure out why you're winning and losing, and then turn that into a playbook that teaches your sellers how to perform like your closers. That's going to immediately get you a bump in productivity. And once you have that win, you're going to get licensed from your CEO to continue to make investments in this space and have the confidence that the investments that you're making are actually going to deliver.
All right. Well, you heard it from the man himself. He's telling you, he's trying to give you the playbook, and ultimately at the end of the day, it's going to spit a playbook out for you. There's so much happening. So, hey, Justin, if somebody says, hey, I'd like to talk to you a little bit more or learn more about you, where would you say for them to try to connect or talk to you?
Well, Carl, I used to work at LinkedIn, so of course I got to say LinkedIn. That's
I'm a little bit shocked that you would say LinkedIn is the place to go. I got to say, but yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Hey, we've never spoken before. This is the very first time. It's been a lot of fun to learn from you and to hear all the cool things you're doing. And I appreciate you taking time out of the day to spend and let me learn from you and ask you some questions. So thanks for doing this. And hopefully it was a good use of your time, and excited for everybody else to hear what we've talked about. So thank you.
Well, Carl, you're doing great work, and we as a sales community need to get better every day. And so appreciate the contribution you're making to that effort.
Oh, you're too kind, sir. That's going to wrap up another episode of the Revenue Problem Solvers podcast. Obviously, want to thank Justin for sharing these incredibly invaluable insights today. Some strategies you can clearly put into action tomorrow. Remember, success leaves clues, and every revenue problem has a solution. Sometimes you just need the right conversation to find it. Until next time, it's Carl with Revenue Problem Solvers, helping you turn your obstacles into opportunities. Thanks for investing time with us today. We'll see you on the next episode.